Before I tell you how everything in my quiet little life was ripped open by a single phone call, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. And if you believe that sometimes the people who walk away quietly are the ones holding the heaviest truths, then stay with me, because what happened next still feels unreal even now. The sound of the belt sander was my music. For the past 8 years it had been the steady rhythm of my days, each grain of cedar dust swirling through the light like a memory made visible. Here in my workshop behind my cabin in Bend, Oregon, I was not the failed civil engineer people whispered about. I was not the disgraced ex-husband they believed had run from responsibility. I was simply a craftsman, shaping honest pieces of wood into something useful. The air smelled of sawdust and pine oil. My hands, roughened from years of sanding, guided the curve of a custom rocking chair as if it were alive. It was peaceful work, a quiet life built on the ruins of another one. I had made my peace with that. At least, I thought I had. Then my old flip phone began to vibrate across the workbench, the harsh buzzing slicing through the calm like a blade. I turned off the sander, and the sudden silence rang louder than the machine itself. I wiped my palms on my jeans and walked over. The screen lit with a name I had not seen in a long time. Evan Hale. 8 years. That was how long it had been since my son last called me, and the last time he did, it was only to tell me I had embarrassed him by existing. No birthdays, no Christmases, no trace of the boy I once carried on my shoulders when we hiked the mountains behind our home. Only silence. Cold, deliberate silence. I opened the phone. My voice came out rough. "Hello." His tone was clipped, the polished accent he had picked up in San Francisco sharpened by annoyance. "Marcus." He never called me Dad. Not anymore. Not for a long time. "Your ex-wife is gone." The words did not land right. Clarissa Montel. Gone. Clarissa, who commanded entire boardrooms with a single raised eyebrow. Clarissa, whose ambition carved skyscrapers into the skyline like her signature. Clarissa, who, even in the worst years of our marriage, never showed anything less than unbreakable resolve. "How?" I asked quietly. "Aneurysm. Last week." It was fast. He said it as if he were reading a weather report. No sorrow, no tremor, no acknowledgement that this woman had once been the axis of our family. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the news settle. I did not love her anymore, but there was a time when she had been my entire world. A time before the lies, before the ruin, the funeral. I started. "It is over," Evan snapped, "and you were not on the list." A chill crept through me. "Now listen carefully," he continued. "I would prefer not to repeat myself. You are required to appear at the reading of the will this Friday, 10 a.m. Kensington Rowe and Myers, LLP, San Francisco. Not an invitation, a summons." "Evan," I said, forcing my voice steady, "there is no reason for me to be there. Clarissa and I settled everything long ago." His laugh was short and cruel. "Oh, trust me, Marcus, no one thinks you are getting anything. She despised you. Everyone knows you are irrelevant to this family. But legally, you need to be present so the executor can tell you officially that you are worth nothing." He paused, letting the venom sink in. "Personally, I want to see your face when they say it." My jaw tightened. The silence between us felt like a canyon full of old grudges. "And don't worry about getting home," he added. "I will leave $15 at the desk for your bus ride back to whatever shed you live in now." Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly and stared out the workshop window. A few pine branches swayed in the autumn wind. The piece I had built here, plank by plank, began to crack at the edges. He wanted me to come so he could watch me break. He wanted a spectacle. Fine. He would get one. I walked into the small bedroom of my cabin and opened the closet. Behind the plaid shirts and worn jeans hung a garment bag coated in a thin layer of dust. I unzipped it and pulled out the charcoal gray suit I had worn on the day my old life collapsed. It felt heavier now, as if it remembered everything I had lost. I brushed it off carefully, smoothing the fabric with deliberate hands. Then I hung it up on the door and stepped back. "Friday morning," I whispered to the room. One last time. I did not know it then, but that phone call was not the end of something. It was the beginning. The opening note of the storm that would tear apart every lie that had been built in my name. And I was walking straight into it. San Francisco always felt like a different planet to me, but the morning I arrived for the will reading, it might as well have been another universe entirely. The taxi dropped me in front of a towering glass structure that seemed to slice the clouds. Kensington Row and Myers LLP. Even the name felt designed to intimidate. Its polished facade reflected the city like a mirror that judged anyone who approached. I stepped out, my old suit pressed as neatly as I could manage. My shoes shined, though the leather had long since begun to betray their age. People streamed past me, carrying briefcases and speaking into sleek earpieces. They moved with purpose and confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the world bends for you. I was painfully aware that it did not bend for me. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral built for worshipping wealth. The marble floor was so glossy, I could see my distorted reflection staring back at me. A man out of time, walking into a place meant for sharper edges and shinier suits. Tall sculptures made of polished steel spiraled toward the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of citrus and something sterile, something expensive. I approached the reception desk, where a young woman in a charcoal blazer gave me a professional smile. It faded the second her eyes took in my suit. "Name, please," she said. "Marcus Hale. I am here for the Montel estate meeting." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "Hale." Her expression shifted slightly, though she tried to hide it. "Yes, you may have a seat. Someone will escort you shortly." I took a seat on a leather sofa that felt firmer than it looked, as though softness was too generous a trait for this building. I clasped my hands together and stared at the abstract painting across the room. Bright colors splattered with deliberate chaos. It looked like emotions thrown against a canvas and then framed in gold. I wondered if that was how my life would look from a distance. Then, the elevator doors slid open with a chime that echoed through the lobby, and there he was. Evan. My son moved as though the world parted around him. He wore a navy Italian suit, so precisely tailored it made my own outfit look like something unearthed from a thrift store bin. His posture was perfect, his confidence sculpted from years of privilege and ambition. He carried a sleek phone in one hand and an air of superiority in the other. Trailing behind him were two figures who fit his world far better than I ever had. Serena Vale. She was stunning in the sharp, polished way of someone who knew how to turn every room into her stage. Her dress looked impossibly expensive, hugging her figure as if tailored by the designer to whom she probably owed more than money. She did not look at me when her eyes passed over. It was not that she found me unworthy. It was that she did not see me at all. And Brandon Pierce. Tanned, immaculate hair, a smile engineered to charm investors and deceive anyone naive enough to trust him. He carried a leather folder pressed to his chest as though it were his crown. They approached the reception desk. Evan spoke without turning his head. "Evan Hale, for the Montel reading. They are expecting me." The receptionist's expression transformed instantly into reverence. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Right away." Evan turned then. His gaze landed on me like a spotlight meant to expose flaws. A slow smirk stretched across his face. "Well, well," he said loudly. "You actually showed up." Serena paused mid-step and gave a delicate laugh, a sound like glass tapping against glass. Brandon chuckled under his breath. I held his stare, letting silence be my response. Evan stepped closer, eyes scanning my suit. "I see you wore your Sunday best. Did the thrift store give you a discount for nostalgia or just pity?" Serena's laughter lingered in the air like perfume. Brandon added, "Maybe vintage is back in style." I did not get the memo. Evan ignored them, his smile turning thinner, sharper. "I thought you might chicken out," he said, "but I am glad you came. This is going to be fun." Fun? The way he said it made something cold settle in my chest. Before I could respond, the elevator chimed again. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped out, his stride steady, his suit perfectly understated. There was no showiness, no desperate display of wealth. His authority was quiet and complete. "Mr. Hale," he said, addressing me first. "Marcus, thank you for coming." His tone held respect. Real respect. Evan stiffened, stunned that the greeting was not directed at him. The man nodded to him with a colder, more distant Mr. Hale, then gestured toward the elevators. I am Alastair Monroe, executor of Ms. Montell's estate. Please follow me. It is time to begin. Evan exhaled sharply, irritation flickering across his face as he stepped inside the elevator. Serena and Brandon flanked him like ornaments. I stepped in last. The doors slid shut, sealing us together, rising toward a room where truth waited like a loaded weapon. And I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The conference room on the 29th floor felt colder than the lobby, as if the air itself had been conditioned to discourage warmth. The long glass windows overlooked the city, but the skyline felt distant, unreachable. At the center sat a massive table made of dark walnut, polished to a mirrored sheen. I took a seat near the far end while Evan claimed the spot directly opposite Monroe, like a prince waiting for his coronation. Serena and Brandon seated themselves on either side of him, forming a picture of entitled expectation. Monroe placed a thick binder on the table and opened it with the care of someone handling a sacred text. He cleared his throat once, glanced around the room, and began reading in a steady voice. This is the last will and testament of Clarissa Montell, dated 2 months prior to her passing. Evan sighed loudly, drumming his fingers on the table. You can skip the legal poetry, he said. Just get to the real part. Monroe ignored him. Clarissa first directed a number of small bequests. He turned a page. To her longtime assistant, Valerie Chen, she leaves $60,000 in recognition of 22 years of service and unwavering loyalty. I remembered Valerie, a gentle woman with patient eyes. Clarissa had often spoken harshly to her, though Valerie never pushed back. Hearing she received something brought a brief flicker of relief. Evan rolled his eyes. 60,000. She probably earned that in tips just cleaning up my mother's messes. Serena snickered as if he had said something hilarious. Brandon readjusted his cufflinks, uninterested. Monroe continued. To the Northern Cascades Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, she leaves $120,000 for the expansion of their raptor aviary. This time Serena leaned toward Evan. Raptors? Like hawks or something? Evan shrugged. She donated to them once because she hit a hawk with her car. I guess she felt guilty for 5 minutes. But Monroe was not finished. To her chauffeur, Daniel Ruiz, she leaves her vintage Breitling watch, along with a note stating, "Thank you for listening more kindly than most." Evan scoffed out loud. That man barely spoke English. Monroe stopped reading. He lifted his eyes and looked at Evan with a calm that was sharp enough to cut. Mr. Hale, your mother wrote these words. I advise letting her speak. Evan flushed but said nothing. Monroe continued. The next items are personal remarks included by Miss Montell. They are to be read exactly as written. Serena blinked, suddenly alert. Brandon straightened in his chair. Monroe read, To Serena Vale, I am returning the necklace she attempted to remove from my bedroom last spring. It is in the custody of my estate office and may be picked up after verification of identity. Serena's mouth fell open. What? She cried. That is not true. I never touched anything. A cold blush crept across her cheeks. She looked at Evan, seeking reassurance. He stared at her, with an expression shifting from surprise to insult. You said you were only in her room for makeup. Serena stammered. I did. She must have misunderstood. Monroe did not look up. To Brandon Pierce, she wrote, I leave nothing but the reminder that insider trading requires skill, discipline, and intelligence. You possess none of the three. Brandon froze. His tan complexion darkened into an angry flush. That is slander, he snapped. She had no proof of anything. Monroe flipped another page slowly, as if giving him time to choke on his indignation. Evan pressed his palms flat against the table. Enough. These people are irrelevant. Can we move to the main estate? Monroe placed a bookmark inside the binder and closed it halfway, his hands folded calmly on top. We will move at the pace the will dictates, Mr. Hale. Your impatience has no authority here. The air tightened around us. I could see the muscle in Evan's jaw twitching. Serena's lips pressed together in embarrassment. Brandon stared at the polished surface of the table, as though it might swallow him. Monroe resumed. Clarissa's next remarks address her son's associates and their influence on her perception of family matters. Evan's eyes flicked upward, wary now. She wrote, "I have watched the people who surround my son, those who encourage his arrogance, indulge his cruelty, and shield him from consequence. To them I leave nothing but the knowledge that their presence shaped my decisions in ways they will never understand." Serena shifted uncomfortably. Brandon's fist clenched. Monroe continued, unfazed. "This concludes the preliminary gifts and personal remarks. We now move to the allocation of major estate assets." Evan straightened, smoothing his tie, his confidence reassembling itself like armor. "That is more like it," he said. But there was something in Monroe's eyes, a flicker, a glint I could not yet name. And it was the first true warning that the ground beneath us was about to split. Monroe lifted the binder again, and the sound of the thick pages shifting echoed through the room like the turning of a judge's gavel. Evan leaned forward with renewed confidence, as though the earlier embarrassments toward his companions were nothing more than warm-up acts before his long-awaited victory. Monroe's tone remained steady. "We move now to the major assets of Ms. Montel's estate." Evan exhaled through his nose, a smug smile curling at the edges of his mouth. Serena placed a manicured hand on his arm, already imagining the wealth she believed she was about to share. Brandon's eyes gleamed with the hungry ambition of a man expecting a generous slice of influence through proximity alone. Monroe continued, "To my son, Evan Hale, I leave the Montel penthouse located on Blue Crest Tower in downtown San Francisco." Evan let out a triumphant breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Serena's face brightened instantly, and Brandon sat up straighter, as though their fortunes were rising with each word. Monroe did not pause, along with all furniture, artwork, and personal belongings within the residence. Evan nodded in satisfaction, already picturing himself standing on the penthouse balcony overlooking the bay. "And," Monroe added, "my complete collection of German precision watches." That did it. Evan could not hide the grin spreading across his face. "My mother never let me near those." "Finally," he said. Serena whispered, "Those alone must be worth $1 million." Brandon murmured, "Probably more. Some collectors would pay triple." Evan looked across the table at me, his triumph glowing. "Hear that, Marcus? Real assets, not coffee money." I said nothing. Monroe adjusted his glasses. However, the single word froze the air. Evan's smirk stalled. "However what?" Monroe flipped to a note clipped beside the watch inventory. Ms. Montel stored the watch collection in a secure vault located within the penthouse. The vault may only be accessed with one physical item. He paused, letting the silence thicken. "A key." Evan frowned. "A key? What key?" Monroe looked directly at me. "The key Clarissa entrusted to her former husband, Marcus Hale." The room went completely still. Serena blinked, her lips parting in confusion. Brandon's brows furrowed deeply. Evan slowly turned his head toward me, disbelief radiating from him like heat. "What?" he said, his voice low and incredulous. "What did you just say?" "Marcus Hale," Monroe repeated evenly. "Your mother placed the key in his possession." Evan stood abruptly. "That is impossible. He has not seen her in years. Why would she give him anything, especially something of value?" I felt the weight of all eyes on me, and my confusion must have been plain. "I do not have any key," I said quietly. Evan laughed, but it was a tight, frantic sound lacking all humor. "You expect me to believe that? This is a stunt, a pathetic, ridiculous stunt." Brandon leaned forward. "Are you sure you do not have something from her? A letter, a package, anything?" I shook my head. "Nothing." Monroe remained composed. "According to Ms. Montel's written instructions, the watches are inaccessible without that key. The estate cannot override the lock without violating the authenticity clause." Evan slammed both hands onto the table. "Authenticity clause? That is absurd. Then I will have the vault drilled open." Monroe closed the binder calmly. Doing so could legally void this portion of the bequest. Evan stared at him, speechless. Serena's voice trembled. "Why would she do that?" Monroe answered her as if reading from a script. "Ms. Montel believed that certain things should only be opened by the one person she trusted with the truth. The truth. The word hit me harder than I expected. Evan paced the length of the table, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. This is ridiculous. My mother would never put anything important in his hands. Serena murmured something to him, but he shook her off. Brandon leaned back, calculating silently. Monroe watched all of this with quiet detachment, as though he had seen 1,000 families unravel in this very room. If the key exists, Monroe said, Mr. Hale will need to locate it. Until then, the vault and its contents remain sealed. Evan pointed a shaking finger at me. If this is some trick, if you are hiding something, if you are working with her to punish me. I met his eyes. I am not hiding anything. He scoffed. You are hiding your entire life. His voice cracked with something darker than anger. Desperation. The key had done something none of us expected. It had cracked the illusion of control Evan built his entire world upon, and without warning, I felt the same tremor of unease. Because I had no key, no memory, no explanation. And yet, somehow, Clarissa had placed another secret directly in my hands. A secret that was only beginning to reveal its shape. Monroe turned another page, though he did it more slowly this time, as if anticipating the explosion brewing in the room. Evan remained standing, one hand braced on the table, his breath coming sharp and shallow. Serena and Brandon exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier smugness evaporating into something more brittle. Monroe cleared his throat. There is one more bequest before we proceed to the primary distribution of the estate. Evan rolled his eyes dramatically and flopped back into his chair. Can we get this over with? Monroe read, To my former husband, Marcus Hale. Every gaze swung toward me. I sat still, bracing myself for whatever Clarissa had crafted as her final public humiliation. I leave the sum of $20. Evan burst out laughing before the sentence fully landed. His laughter echoed harshly in the sterile room. Serena covered her mouth but could not hide the grin stretching across her lips. Brandon smirked openly. $20, Evan repeated through his laughter. 20! My God! She really did still have a sense of humor. Monroe continued reading. For his transportation home. There it was. The blow Clarissa knew would land hardest in a room like this. Not just a small sum, but a symbol, a dismissal, a reminder of the man they thought had fallen so far beneath them that even his existence was an inconvenience. Evan wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. This is perfect. Absolutely perfect. He reached into his designer wallet and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. He tossed it across the table. The bill drifted before settling right in front of me. Here, old man, get yourself something nicer than the bus. Maybe a sandwich for the ride back to your little mountain shack. Serena giggled. Brandon snorted. I did not move. I simply looked at the money. Evan leaned back, crossing his arms triumphantly. That settles it. We are finished here. He stood and straightened his jacket, turning to Serena and Brandon. Let us celebrate. I want reservations at Horizon Tower by noon. Monroe did not even look up. Sit down? The command was soft but sharp. Evan froze mid-step. Slowly, he turned. Excuse me. Sit down, Monroe repeated. We are not finished. Evan sneered. She already gave him $20. What more is there? Monroe reached beneath the table and lifted a thin, sealed envelope stamped with deep maroon wax. The seal bore Clarissa's initials carved with precision. This, he said, is a codicil, a legally binding amendment to the will. It was signed 1 week before her death. Evan's smile faltered. He turned pale. Serena whispered, Is that normal? Brandon shook his head. Not for something this major. Monroe broke the wax seal with a careful, deliberate movement. The quiet sound of cracking wax sliced through the tension like a blade. He unfolded the document slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter clipped to several notarized pages. This codicil, Monroe explained, supersedes all prior clauses regarding the primary estate. Evan collapsed back into his chair. What are you talking about? She would have told me. She always told me when she made big decisions. Monroe glanced at him, and for the first time, there was something almost like pity in his eyes. Mr. Hale, your mother did not tell you many things. Evan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Monroe began reading the letter aloud. To my son, Evan Hale. Evan whispered, "No. You must listen to this in the presence of all parties, as I have instructed." I felt the air shift around us, as if the room itself held its breath. "I am writing this because I am done hiding from the truth." Evan pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. "For 20 years, you have believed a lie." A shudder tore through Evan's posture. Serena and Brandon leaned in slightly, drawn by the gravity of what was unfolding. "The lie that your father betrayed me. The lie that he destroyed this family." Monroe paused only long enough for the words to settle like lead. "That lie was mine." A shocked gasp came from Serena. Brandon's eyes widened. Evan's lips parted. "No, she would never write that." He sounded like a child again, bewildered and frightened. But Monroe read on. "The truth is that your father saved my company, my name, and your future, and I let him take the fall for my mistakes." I felt the room tilt slightly. The familiar ache in my chest returned, but this time it was sharper, as if cutting free something long buried. Monroe's voice grew heavier, more solemn. "This codicil contains the truth you were never meant to carry alone." Evan pressed both hands against the table as if the weight might crush him. Monroe folded the first page back and prepared to read the rest. And it was clear to every soul in that room that the cruel joke was over. The real unraveling was only beginning. Monroe lifted the letter and continued reading with a tone that felt almost ceremonial, as if every word carried the weight of a verdict long overdue. Across the table, Evan sat motionless. His eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused. For the first time since he walked into the room, he looked small. Clarissa's handwriting filled the page in elegant strokes, each word sharp and deliberate. 20 years ago, she wrote, Montel Urban Development, the company I built from nothing, was on the brink of catastrophic failure. I had made reckless decisions. I had trusted the wrong partners and entered a project with offshore investors who were not what they appeared. The collapse was imminent, and the consequences were far worse than financial ruin. Serena shifted in her seat. Brandon leaned in slightly, unable to mask his growing curiosity. Those investors, Monroe read, were part of a shadow network using real estate to launder enormous sums through shell corporations. I did not realize what I had stepped into until it was too late. They presented me with two choices. Option 1, declare bankruptcy and face federal charges for negligence and fraud. Option 2, cooperate with them and funnel their money through my projects for years to come. Evan swallowed hard. His voice was faint. She never told me any of this. Monroe continued without acknowledging him. I collapsed under the weight of my own mistakes. I was terrified. I could not think. I could not sleep. I could barely breathe. And then your father stepped in. Something inside me tightened at those words. He took the contracts from me, Clarissa wrote. He met with the investors. He saw the danger and understood the consequences better than I ever did. He knew that if the investigation reached me, the company would die instantly. My name would be destroyed. You would lose everything. Her script grew tighter, as though written with a trembling hand. He offered them something else. A firewall. A way to keep me untouched. Monroe paused, letting the silence stretch. I watched Evan's face contort. A flicker of confusion, then disbelief, then something darker. Monroe read on. Using his own credentials as a licensed civil engineer, your father created a series of project management firms under his own name. He rerouted the contracts. He signed the documents that would have implicated me. He approved inflated budgets and supervised phantom construction work. He took every risk upon himself so that I could remain clean. Brandon let out a low breath. That is an insane level of sacrifice. Serena stared at me with an expression that bordered on awe and discomfort. Monroe continued. Your father did not profit from this. He did not gain a dime. He worked day and night for nearly 2 years, maintaining the illusion that my company was legitimate, while funneling the offshore funds through his own accounts, ensuring every trace pointed to him and away from me. I remembered those nights. The empty apartment, the endless spreadsheets, the whispered phone calls with people whose names I never learned. The fear that never left. Clarissa's handwriting grew heavier. When the federal investigation began, they saw only him, his companies, his signatures, his decisions. He confessed to financial misconduct he never committed, so they would stop looking at me. Evan flinched, as though the words struck him physically. Your father lost his license, his reputation, and his entire career. I watched him walk into that fire, and I let him burn alone. Monroe's voice softened for just a moment. Instead of standing beside him, Clarissa wrote, I let you believe he had betrayed us. I cultivated the lie because it protected me from admitting the truth. Serena whispered, My God. Brandon's eyes darted between me and the letter, his expression troubled. Clarissa's next lines were even sharper. The truth is that your father is the reason you grew up in comfort, the reason you attended prestigious schools, the reason you have the life you enjoy so proudly. Every privilege you have ever known was bought with his sacrifice. Evan's breath hitched. His face was ghostly pale. Clarissa continued, And yet you repaid him with contempt. I watched you mock him. I watched you dismiss him. I watched you call him a failure to his face. And every time you did, I stayed silent. I used your anger to shield myself from my shame. My throat tightened. Monroe read on, his voice unwavering. I allowed you to see him as the villain, so that you would never look closely enough to see who truly was. Evan whispered, No, stop. But Monroe kept reading. I have lived with the guilt of that silence for 2 decades. I have tried to bury it. I have tried to justify it. I have tried to forget it. But the truth has claws, and it always returns for those who run from it. He turned the page. Now, at the end of my life, I refuse to let the lie stand. Evan covered his face with both hands. Monroe lowered the letter only long enough to look at him. Your mother wanted you to hear every word. He lifted the final sheet. Your father saved me, Clarissa wrote. He saved you. He saved everything you built your identity upon, and I let him lose himself in the process. He was not the failure. I was. The room vibrated with silence. Brandon stared down at the table, suddenly unsure of the man he had attached himself to. Serena withdrew slightly from Evan's side, as though his pedestal had crumbled beneath him. And Evan, broken and trembling, whispered something so faint I barely heard it. All these years, Monroe placed the letter on the table with reverent finality. This, he said softly, is the truth buried beneath your life. And I realized in that moment that nothing about the day would ever return to normal. It was not just a will reading. It was an exhumation. And Clarissa had just unearthed everything. Monroe let the silence settle before reaching for a second sealed document, smaller but unmistakably official. Evan stared at it as though it were a weapon aimed directly at him. His breathing was unsteady, his shoulders trembling under the weight of a truth he had never imagined could exist. We now proceed, Monroe said quietly, to the legal distribution of the estate under Article 8 of the updated testament. Serena sat rigid, her hands tucked tightly into her lap. Brandon swallowed hard, the gleam of ambition in his eyes rapidly fading. The room felt colder than before. Monroe opened the document and read, Clarissa Reynolds, being of sound mind and full mental capacity, hereby issue the following bequests. He paused, turning his eyes deliberately toward me, then to Evan. First, to my former husband, Mason Hale, I grant the Cedar Ridge cabin in Vermont and all its belongings. The words hit me like a gust of cold air. Cedar Ridge, a place I had not seen in 20 years, a place where Clarissa and I once spent long summers before everything fell apart. Evan stiffened but said nothing. Monroe continued. Second, I grant to Mason Hale all personal correspondence between myself and the individuals tied to the offshore investment group, including all original files stored in the secured vault. Brandon inhaled sharply. Serena looked confused. Evan jerked forward in his seat. That material, Monroe explained, is complete, unedited, and legally notarized. Its possession grants full authority over the truth of the events of 2004 and 2005. I understood immediately. She had given me the power to clear my name publicly, or to keep the past buried forever. The choice was mine. Monroe turned another page. Third, I grant to Mason Hale my majority stake in Montel Urban Development, which totals 71% ownership. Serena gasped softly. Brandon looked stunned. Evan stared at Monroe as though the words were hallucinations. Monroe read on. This transfer grants Mason exclusive controlling interest in all subsidiaries, assets, patents, and real estate portfolios currently under the Montel umbrella, valued at approximately $140 million. $140 million. Not a number I had ever expected to be tied to again. Not a world I had believed I would enter again. But Clarissa had written it with certainty, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. Monroe lowered his gaze to Evan. And now, the final clause. Evan sat up abruptly. His hands were shaking, but his eyes burned with raw desperation. Clarissa wrote, "To my son, Evan Reynolds, I leave a single bequest." A flicker of hope sparked in his eyes. Monroe read slowly. "I leave him the opportunity to confront the truth. Not wealth, not property, but the mirror he has spent a lifetime avoiding." Evan blinked. What does that even mean? Monroe placed the letter flat on the table. "It means exactly what it says." "Where is my portion?" Evan demanded. His voice cracked. "She wouldn't leave me nothing." Monroe reached into a drawer and withdrew an envelope. "Your mother instructed me to deliver this to you in person." He slid it toward Evan. Evan ripped it open with frantic fingers. He pulled out a single certified check. For a moment he stared at it, confused. Then the color drained from his face. No, 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 no. The number was unmistakable. $15. Brandon nearly choked on his own breath. Serena covered her mouth. I felt my stomach twist. Monroe spoke calmly. "Your mother wrote that this was the amount you offered your father 2 months ago, when he refused to sign over the last of his rights in the Vermont property. She found it fitting." Evan slammed the table so hard the glasses rattled. "This is not legal. This is not binding." She was confused, manipulated. "This is fraud." Monroe lifted a folder as thick as a dictionary. "This is your mother's cognitive evaluation, conducted by 3 independent medical specialists. She was fully competent." Evan shoved his chair back and staggered to his feet. He jabbed a finger toward me. "He did this. He got to her. He poisoned her. This is all his doing." His voice grew shrill, unhinged. "You think I will accept this? You think I will just sit here while this washed-up nobody takes everything?" I did not respond. I simply watched him unravel. Brandon stepped away from him. Serena scooted her chair back slowly, as though sitting next to him suddenly felt dangerous. Monroe remained calm. "Mr. Reynolds, you will lower your voice." Evan kicked his chair aside. It clattered hard against the wall. "I will contest this. I will tear this will apart. I will sue every one of you into the ground." "You are free to file a contest," Monroe replied, "though you should know that any investigation will involve a full forensic audit of the original money laundering materials." Evan froze. Monroe continued evenly. "And since your mother specified that all such materials are stored under your father's legal control, the only outcome would be the public release of those documents in court." A shudder ran through Evan's body. Clarissa had trapped him completely. She left him nothing to fight for and no path to challenge it without destroying himself. He trembled, eyes wild. "You cannot do this to me. I am her son." Monroe said quietly, "Your mother believed that being her son was the very reason this was necessary." Evan made a sound halfway between a gasp and a sob. His rage evaporated into something brittle and hollow. He whispered, "So I get nothing." Monroe nodded once. "Your inheritance is the truth, Mr. Reynolds. The truth you spent your life refusing to see." Evan sank to his knees, his palms flat on the polished floor. He was not crying. It was worse. He was empty, completely emptied of every illusion he had ever lived by. Serena and Brandon watched in stunned silence. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet ache. Monroe closed the folder. "This concludes the distribution of the estate." And just like that, my entire life had changed. And Evan's entire world had collapsed. When the conference room finally emptied, the silence that remained felt almost sacred. Evan had been escorted out a few minutes earlier, his steps uneven, his breath shaky, his entire identity collapsing inward like a crumbling tower. Serena and Brandon left without a word. Their ambition, once bright and sharp, now flickered out like wet matches. I stayed seated, my hands resting on the polished table, staring at the envelope that now belonged to me, the bequests, the stakes, the legacy I had never asked for and never imagined holding again. $140 million. A corporation I had abandoned 2 decades earlier, and a vault of documents that could rewrite the last 20 years of my life. Monroe observed me with quiet understanding. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the earlier formality. "Your wife did not intend to burden you," he said gently. "She intended to set you free." I let out a slow breath and leaned back. Freedom. The word felt unfamiliar, heavy in a different way. For 20 years I had lived a life that was small but peaceful. Wood shavings, quiet mornings, the smell of cedar and varnish. I had found a version of myself that required no armor, no lies, no boardrooms full of men with knives hidden in their smiles. Now Clarissa had dragged me back into the storm one last time, not out of cruelty, but out of guilt, out of love twisted by fear, out of a need to put right what she had destroyed. I reached for the small brass key Monroe had placed on the table earlier. It fit in the center of my palm as if it had been waiting for me for years. "Is the penthouse still untouched?" I asked quietly. Monroe nodded. "Everything is exactly as she left it. The study, the vault, the safes." She made sure of it. There was a long pause. My heart thudded once, hard, like a warning. "I don't know what I am supposed to do now," I admitted. Monroe folded his hands. "You do what she never could. You decide what truth deserves to live in the light." He stood, packed his folders, and paused before the door. "Whatever you choose, Mr. Hale, it will finally be your choice." When he left, I sat alone for several minutes in the unnatural stillness. The skyscrapers outside stood like dark sentinels guarding the entire weight of the city's secrets. Somewhere below, cars rushed by, unaware that a single man's life had just been rewritten. Eventually, I rose, took the key, and walked out. The elevator ride to the street floor was slow, almost ceremonial. When I stepped outside, the autumn wind hit me with a sharp chill. New York was alive, loud, indifferent. Clarissa had always loved that about it. She used to say the city swallowed shame and ambition equally. I hailed a cab and headed to the penthouse. The streetlights streaked across the windows as the car moved through Manhattan, and memories flickered along with them. Clarissa laughing on a balcony. Clarissa scribbling blueprint ideas on napkins. Clarissa standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer before another fight for her empire. And the moment she broke, the moment she begged me to save her, the moment I stepped into a darkness she tried to outshine. When I reached the building, the doorman recognized my name immediately and opened the glass doors with a solemn nod. I wondered what Clarissa had told him about me, whether she had spoken of me with contempt or with the quiet regret she had carried privately. The penthouse was exactly as Monroe described, frozen in time, a gallery of Clarissa's life, clean surfaces, sculptures from her travels, architectural books stacked neatly. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered in the air, something floral, something sharp. I found the painting Monroe mentioned in the study, a canvas of storm clouds rolling over a black sea. Clarissa had chosen it intentionally. She always hid important things in metaphors. Behind it was the wall safe. The key slid in easily. Inside was a thick envelope labeled Mason Hale. Below it, a stack of files. Dozens of them. My signature on contracts. My name on shell corporations. Wire transfers labeled with numbers I once memorized at 3 a.m. And letters from Clarissa. Letters she had written during those years but never sent. Letters begging for forgiveness she had never dared to speak aloud. My hands shook as I opened the top one. "Mason, I do not have the courage to say this to your face. I am so ashamed of what I let happen. I know you will never ask for anything from me again, so I am giving you the only thing I can, the truth." I closed my eyes. There were dozens more like it. Letters full of remorse. Letters she kept locked away because she was still Clarissa. Still too proud. Still too afraid. I spent hours reading them, until the first hints of dawn crept through the penthouse windows. When I finished, I stood and walked back to the balcony. The city spread below like a glowing sea. Clarissa had forced me into one last burden, but she had also gifted me something far rarer. My name. My honor. My story. I realized then that I would not sell the company. I would not chase the money. I would not let the past consume me again. But I would tell the truth, not out of vengeance, not to destroy Evan, but to free myself from the final ghost of the life I left behind. As the sun rose, warming the cold steel of the balcony rail, I finally understood the lesson Clarissa's confession had carved into the bones of our family. A lie can build a palace, but it cannot keep it standing. Only truth can. And no matter how deeply it is buried, truth waits. It watches. It claws its way upward, until the day someone is brave enough to open the door and let it breathe again. That morning, I became that someone, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt whole.